Right now we have an interesting story to talk to you about. Gary Dierenfeld is here, social worker, parenting columnist for the Hamilton Spectator. The website is yoursocialworker.com. Gary, welcome back to the Nightside.
Barb, always a pleasure to be with you.
Great to talk to you. And I know that you've received this story that we found. It's actually a parent blog, The Hug That Ruined My Son's Birthday Party. And it talks about a parent watching someone else really insist that the child hug someone. And we've all seen this, like a relative that maybe brought them a gift. And, it's like hug them. And the child wants to do anything but hug them. And there is this popular argument that if kids are forced to engage in physical contact they don't want, they could be vulnerable to unwanted physical contact in the later years. And we're talking about things like sexual assault, molestation. Maybe I can just get you to comment on that statement.
Sure. So you have to know there's no scientific evidence to support that concern, but there certainly is the concern that you stated, that if we force a child to accept a hug that they're not seeking to accept, might it teach that child to subordinate them to the advances of other people, where those other advances might be sinister. So what we want to really teach children is, you know what, at the end of the day, you're in charge of your body and who gets to touch it, regardless of the circumstance. So rather than forcing the child to receive that hug, we simply say, well, you don't want to receive a hug, you don't have to receive it. It teaches the child that they own the rights to their own body.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think that parents who do this or who have done this, I'm sure are very well-meaning parents, but they're clearly worrying more about offending the grown-up who maybe just gave their child a gift or something, like, go hug them. And sometimes parents get embarrassed if the kids won't do it. But really, as you say, the kid should be in charge and have boundaries around their own body.
Right. So let's change the context a little. Let's say, you know what, you really do know your family. You come from an otherwise wholesome family. Concerns for sexual impropriety, just not on your radar because it's not a part of your experience. You've got a kid that from time to time can be non-compliant to other requests and somewhat persnickety, and they say, you've always loved, Aunt Ethel. Go give Aunt Ethel a hug and thank her for the gift. And the kid kind of snottily says, no, I just want my gift, to heck with Aunt Ethel. So we want to look at the context, because then maybe it is appropriate to say, you know what, no hug, no gift. You're just being rude for the sake of being rude, self-righteous, and looking at her only to the degree to which she can give you that gift. So it's not that we don't necessarily want to promote that hug in that circumstance, but we want to also understand the larger context. The other, if I may, argument that was made in that blog was this mother was concerned that if she forced her child to give that hug, particularly that boy child, might that boy child learn to force himself on others himself, particularly, at a later stage of life, maybe in adolescence.
Sure.
So she's concerned about the social learning that can occur at that young age to show up inappropriately at an older age. And again, it's not like we have scientific research to support these concerns, but we always do want to be mindful, if not concerned, but at least mindful of what we may be role modeling and how it can come back to haunt us.
Gary Dierenfeld is my guest, social worker, parenting columnist for the Hamilton Spectator. We're talking about a blog about kids being forced to hug people when they really don't want to, and what that could be setting them up for later in life. And again, Gary, you mentioned there is no data to support this, but it is something that has been brought up over and over through the years. And one interesting point I thought that the blogger made was that we're in this age where we're teaching our boys and girls that, you know, they need to have consent all along the way when it comes to relationships and sexual contact. So we're telling them on the one hand, well, you need to have consent, and on the other hand, you have no choice. Go hug Aunt Ethel.
Exactly. And, you know, I'm sure many of the listeners, they're going to fall on either side of this debate, and largely that will depend on their own childhood experiences. And so if you have been victim or subject to inappropriate sexual advances, you may be more sensitized to this as an issue than if you didn't have any of those kinds of experiences. So you know, the parent needs to be aware where they, the parent, are coming from in terms of their own experience and how that may intertwine with their views on this issue.
So when it comes to this sort of issue, if you were to advise parents, would you suggest that they then not force their kids to have to hug someone against their own will?
Right. So it's not black and white. If the kid is an otherwise, you know, reasonable kid in good charge of their own senses, they're not tired, they're not being malicious, they're just not comfortable with, you know, aunt or uncle so-and-so and giving the hug, you know what, I likely wouldn't press that, but I might require the child to say, you know, say thank you.
Yeah.
You know, be polite, be civil. Doesn't mean you got to embrace. And you know what? Some kids, just to change this around a little bit, some kids just don't like to be hugged.
Sure.
You know, some kids have a sensitivity to the touch of others. And so that might be physically uncomfortable for the child, and we do want to respect that as well.
I want to ask you, too, and this is sort of, I don't know if it's off topic, it's something sort of aside from what we were just gearing up to talk about, but what are your thoughts, because this is something I'm also never been comfortable with, what are your thoughts on adults tickling children?
So, again, it depends on the context, the degree, and the child. Some kids love the game of tickle. And as long as it's controlled and it doesn't press the child to a point of discomfort, why not? Right? That's a game. It's playful. If, however, the child loses control of the situation and the tickler is tickling beyond the comfort of the child, that's inappropriate. And we want the child in that circumstance to, in a sense, be able to tap out. Hey, no, give, uncle, please stop. And that we do want respected.
Okay, so we will continue with Gary Dierenfeld. We're going to take a quick break. We've got some calls coming in. We welcome your calls at 416-872-1010. You can text us at 71010. What are your thoughts on kids being forced to hug people against their will? For instance, an aunt or an uncle or family member gives them a gift and the parent says, hug your Uncle Tom, hug him, and the kid doesn't want to. And I also wanted to enter tickling into the conversation because I have a story to tell you when we come back that is something that happened to me that I will never forget. And I think it falls into that same category of physical contact against a child's will. And I don't think it's talking about a parent playing a game with a child and tickling them and making the kid laugh. I mean, I think it's when the kid does not want to be tickled and is forced to be tickled. 416-872-1010. Have you had any experience with this yourself, your own kids? We had an interesting text that I'll read to you when you come back. You're listening to The Night Side at 7:40 along. Right now, we're talking with Gary Dierenfeld, social worker, parenting columnist for the HamiltonSpectator.com. The website is, or the Hamilton Spectator, and the website is yoursocialworker.com. We're talking about a blog about the hug that ruined my son's birthday party. Someone talking about their son being forced into unwanted physical contact. He did not want to hug his relative, and this popular argument that if kids are forced to engage in physical contact they don't want when they're young, They might be vulnerable to unwanted physical contact when they get older. Gary, we've got a couple of calls coming in, and I want you to have the opportunity to answer some of these questions.
Sure.
So if you can hang on the line, we're going to go. And if you want to talk to Gary or comment on this about forcing kids into unwanted physical contact, hugging relatives, it may seem like not that big a deal, but it could be a big deal down the road. 416-872-1010. We're going to start with Phil. Hi, Phil. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the issue is bigger than just hugging or kissing or unwanted whatever. I think it gets into the area of comfort zones. And if you allow people to continually live in their comfort zones, what happens is your comfort zone actually gets smaller and smaller until you turn into this narcissistic human-like being who thinks the entire universe revolves around them. You don't get along with anybody. So I think it's a kind of a dangerous process if you start allowing Junior to dictate everything. If Uncle Jim gives him a bike for Christmas, you should give him a hug. If his parents say, go give him a hug, and he doesn't want to, I don't care, go give him a hug. It's the right thing to do. Be honorable.
Gary?
You know what? And that's a reasonable point of view. This caller raises another interesting point that sometimes if we're just not comfortable with something, if we shy away from that something, we never have the opportunity to gain comfort with it, and then our world can shrink. So he's bringing yet a new perspective that I hadn't, quite frankly, even thought of myself. I thought that was great.
But so if we're not comfortable with the idea of physical contact with a certain person, is there any reason we need... That was Phil saying goodbye.
Okay, good. I'm still here.
Is there any reason that we need to force ourselves to feel comfortable? Like physical contact is a real issue for me because of personal space.
Sure. And so, that's where sometimes we have to trust parents to know their own children and make that judgment call on behalf of their own children. So there is no blanket statement that I can give in terms of right or wrong because it's always situational and dependent upon the personalities and the sensitivities of the people involved.
Sure, and I bet too, look, parents know this, and there might be people who are relatives through marriage. There are sometimes relatives you come across that you don't really want them to be hugging your kids.
Yeah, they could be icky parents, and we may know that they have a history of some sort of impropriety, and for them to hug or kiss or embrace a child, we may worried that it's part of the process of grooming that child's relationship with that person such that that person can eventually take advantage of that child. So if you know that the other adult does have that kind of past, has that history, you know what? We do want to be protective.
416-872-1010. Your thoughts about whether or not kids should be forced to hug relatives that they don't want to, or family, friends. I mean, has your kid ever been in that position where you think it's the polite thing to do? Give them a hug, give them a kiss, and your child is sort of hiding behind you. We're talking about that in terms of the possibility that down the road that could lead to kids being vulnerable to unwanted physical contact. Con is on the line. Hi, Con. Go ahead.
Hi. My question just revolves around, with immediate relatives, like, say, grandparents. There are times when, I'd say, like, my dad, I have a 3.5-year-old who gets a little up close and personal with my boy. And, it's hard for me to let go of that feeling, whether what's appropriate and what sort of, give him his space type deal, right? Mm-hmm. So, he'll see him, he'll be ecstatic about seeing my son. And, I'm obviously very happy that he is. But then it's like, well, come, give me a kiss. Can I get a kiss? And I just think that sometimes maybe I feel a little awkward about that.
Yeah.
You know what? I've been thinking a lot about whether or not, I'm justified in thinking that way. Can you just clarify whether or not, it is acceptable, and what level of distance is okay, and what level of close-up and personal feelings are justified?
And also how to deal with it if you don't want someone with their mouth all over your kid.
Well, he is my dad, so I can't really tell him to just back off.
No, but
at the same time, I want to have a reasonable way of talking to him. And you know what? I've been wanting to talk to him for a long time, and I haven't, so I think this is a great discussion for for you to help me out with it.
All right.
I'm going to help you out. What you can tell your parents is this. Say, I want you to have a loving relationship with my son, your grandchild. You may not realize this, but as you impose yourself upon him for that kiss, it makes our son feel uncomfortable and awkward, and he wants to withdraw from the relationship. Maybe if you didn't impose yourself upon him, but respected his comfort zone, he would more naturally be apt to be affectionate with you in the future. So this is a good message to give an adult whose boundaries may be imposing on your child.
So maybe ask him to peck him on the cheek rather than peck him on the cheek yourself.
Or don't say peck him on the cheek. Just explain. You may not realize it, Dad, but you're actually harming the relationship with grandson by imposing yourself on him for a kiss because it makes him feel uncomfortable. I think that if you didn't impose that on him, you'd actually have a more enjoyable relationship with your grandson. At the end of the day, that's what we want.
Perfect. Yeah, because there are times when, my little guy, he just totally runs away from him, and my dad just tells him, why are you running away? And he's kind of wondering about that. And I'm guessing it's probably because he's slobbering a little bit.
I have to be so cautious how I've approached my nephews and nieces when they were growing up. I'm a believer that the adult can ask permission and not just expect that hug and kiss.
Yeah.
So I would say to, the children, can I give you a hug? Yep. Not come here and kiss me. It's not a demand on you. It's a permission I'm seeking from you. Mm-hmm. And then I respect the answer.
That's
and then
great.
I have a nice relationship with my nieces and nephews.
Awesome. Well, thank you for clarifying. I really appreciate it.
Terrific question, Con. Thanks a lot for the call. Gary, that's fantastic. And I'll tell you something, and I've got to get to this little story I was going to tell too, but I wanted to tell you, so our family, we're Italian, and there are some little kids, and some people are always all over them. And it's not that I don't want to hug and kiss them. I don't want to invade their personal space. Mm-hmm. So what I'll tend to do is I'll rub them on the arm or I'll touch their hair to say hello, but I don't want to get my face in their face or wrap them in a hug in case it makes them uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And, I wanted to mention just before we go, when I was really little, my parents had a cottage, and there were some people up at the cottage, and people sat on these stairs going up and down from the dock. And there was a guy that I didn't know sitting there with some friends, and when I passed by him, he pulled me onto his lap and started tickling me. And I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and I will never forget it. I might have been a little bit younger, actually, now that I think about it, maybe 4 or 5. And it was horrible.
It's a totally inappropriate encounter by a stranger.
Yeah, it was just awful, and that's why I guess to this day I'm very sensitive about not strangers, but people who aren't like the dad, the mom, tickling kids. I don't like it.
Yeah. No, what you described was icky, and so that really set your radar up, and your antennae for that, it's still up. All
right, Gary, thanks a lot for this. Really appreciate it.
Barb, it was just such a pleasure to be on with you, talking about these things and being able to educate parents.
Terrific. We'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.
All the best.
Gary Dierenfeld, social worker, parenting columnist for the Hamilton Spectator. The website, if you want to check it out, lots of great information there, is yoursocialworker.com. Coming up in the next hour, Howard Levitt is here. It will be